On April 27, 1944, during a practice landing in preparation for D-Day, a group of German torpedo boats managed to launch a devastating surprise attack on a convoy of landing ships. In the space of an hour, they turned Exercise Tiger into a disaster that claimed more Allied lives than the real landing on Utah Beach would 6 weeks later. Exercise Tiger was a dress rehearsal for the landing of the 4th Infantry Division on Utah Beach. More than 25,000 personnel were involved, with practice landings taking place on an area of coastline known as Slapton Sands, which bore a strong resemblance to the beach they would be landing on in Normandy for real. The Allied High Command, from General Eisenhower downwards, was keen that practice landings were as realistic as possible, to prepare the troops for the real thing. At sea, this meant the convoys of landing ships would take artificially long routes to the beach to simulate the length of time it would take to cross the channel to Normandy. It also meant that the bulk of the naval forces assigned to the exercise would sail with the initial wave of troops, which would land at Slapton in the early morning of April 27th. This was because in the actual invasion it was these ships that would be most at risk to German attack, while follow-up convoys containing reinforcements would be in less danger. This principle meant that Convoy T4, Tiger's reinforcement group planned to arrive on the morning of the 28th, would be closely escorted only by the corvette HMS Azalea and destroyer HMS Scimitar, while other destroyers and torpedo boats maintained a protective cordon around Lime Bay during the exercise. This naval side of Exercise Tiger was a big logistical task, requiring the close coordination of more than 200 ships over multiple days and across 2 navies. This placed a high strain on the Allied naval staff at Plymouth under Rear Admiral Ralph Letham. Letham's staff was also having to deal simultaneously with preparations for Exercise Fabius, an even bigger exercise across multiple beaches scheduled for the start of May, as well as ongoing work for the real invasion a month later. Staff were overworked and tired. This video is sponsored by MyHeritage, the #1 family history service. Finding connections to the past in my own family is one of the first things that gave me an interest in history. My interest in the Mediterranean theatre in World War II was driven by knowing that for much of the war, my grandfather was stationed in Egypt. At the time of Operation Pedestal, he was at RAF Shadur. MyHeritage has an easy-to-use tool for mapping your own family tree, and access to over 19 billion historical records. With this vast wealth of information, you can find out about your ancestors, even those that lived more than a century ago. For example, through MyHeritage in the past, I've been able to find the service record of a great-great-uncle from the latter part of World War I, shedding light on his life and enhancing a video about the deployment that he died on. MyHeritage can also make connections for you. Just enter simple biographical information and MyHeritage's algorithms will cross-reference the family trees of other users with its Smart Matches feature, finding family members that you might not even know you had. On top of all of this, MyHeritage can also bring old photos to life with its colorization technology. If you want to use MyHeritage to trace your own past, you can sign up for a 14-day free trial to MyHeritage at the link in the description below and enjoy all of the amazing features it has to offer. If you decide to continue your subscription, you'll get a 50% discount. Thanks again to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. As the first exercise landings began at Slapton, Convoy T4 was forming up under Commander Bernard Scahill, with 5 ships leaving Plymouth at 9:30 AM on April 27th, linking up with 3 more off Brixham before starting their lengthened route towards Slapton, where they would arrive the next morning. But they were already in a bit of trouble after the destroyer Scimitar collided with another vessel in Plymouth and was ordered to stay behind for repairs. No replacement for Scimitar was sent, leaving the 8 LSTs to make their long journey with only a single corvette for company. The day passed uneventfully, but across the channel the Germans were preparing for an operation which would change that. Based at Cherbourg in Brittany were the 5th and 9th torpedo boat flotillas, operating there since February with the objective of disrupting some of the Allied shipping that passed up and down the Channel coast all the time. Up until the end of April, the torpedo boats had been frustrated by poor weather and rough seas, which these small craft struggled in. But as day turned to night on April 27th, the sea was calm. At 10 PM, both flotillas left Cherbourg and set out across the channel. After steaming west past Alderney, they turned north, managing to slip through the cordon of Allied ships around Lyme Bay without detection. The group now divided, with 5th Flotilla under Lieutenant Commander Bernd Klug patrolling in the eastern half of the bay, Lieutenant Commander Freiherr von Meerbach's smaller 9th Flotilla heading further west. At about midnight, the German boats appeared on Allied shore-based radar screens, and at 12:07, Plymouth signalled T4's escort, HMS Azalea, to inform them of contact with suspected German torpedo boats heading north off Portland. Azalea's captain, Lieutenant Commander George Geddes, assumed that the LSTs had heard the same message he had. Geddes' orders were to disperse the convoy and head towards the coast in the event of an attack, but they were silent on what to do at this point, with a threat existing but no attack in progress. In the absence of any orders otherwise from T4's Commander Scahill or from the overall naval commander for Exercise Tiger, Rear Admiral Don Moon, he decided to keep on his planned course, leading the LSTs in a straight line along its predetermined course at a speed of just 3.5 knots. In the wake of the radar sighting, the Allied commander at Plymouth suddenly realised that since Simonton had been ordered in for repairs, T4 had set off with only one escort, and was now dangerously vulnerable to this developing threat. HMS Saladin, which was patrolling off Slapton, was chosen to reinforce T4, but Saladin was over 30 miles away, and did not receive the order to move to the convoy's aid until 1:45 AM, and by then, it would be too late. As the Allies struggled to react to events, T4 turned to the southeast as it progressed along the prepared route to Slapton, turning towards the area in which the torpedo boats had been reported. Geddes was unfortunately wrong about what the LSTs behind him knew. A typo in the orders provided to the American ships before they left meant they were all listening to the wrong frequency, and so did not hear the warning from Plymouth at all. To them, everything was normal. So normal, in fact, Commander Scahill was off duty and asleep. But suddenly, at 1:30 AM, the last ship in the line, LST 507, came under 40mm fire from an unknown source to the east. Its own anti-air gun crews fired back, but could see almost nothing in the darkness. A few minutes later, LST 58 in the middle of the line had a similar experience, with tracer fire appearing to originate from somewhere on its starboard side. The sudden eruption of noise provoked confusion aboard all the ships of T4. Many called their crews to general quarters, but there is an air of doubt over whether this is a real attack. Could this all be part of the exercise? Then, as quickly as it appeared, the gunfire faded away. At 1:53, at least 4 LSTs relaxed from general quarters, and nobody was quite sure what the source of the fire was. A few minutes of peace go by, before at 2:03 LST 499 suddenly swings to port, as its crew spot a torpedo racing towards them from the east. 499 is able to narrowly avoid the impact, but at the back of the line 507 is not so lucky. A torpedo slams into the middle of the ship, with the explosion igniting gasoline in vehicles crowded onto the ship's tank deck, starting a huge fire. Fuel oil leaking from the LST also catches fire, surrounding the ship with burning sea. Chaos breaks out on board as the fire rages out of control and abandoned ship is ordered. Hundreds of sailors and soldiers go into the water, many of them wearing their issued CO2 life vests incorrectly around their waists, with the effect of flipping them upside down in the water when activated. At the head of the LST line, some 4 kilometers to the southeast, Commander Scahill is at this point woken up, with a burning ship visible some way astern. With the LSTs maintaining radio silence, Scahill has no way to be sure what the burning ship is. Doubt still persists over whether this all might be part of an ultra-realistic exercise. At 2:17 AM, these doubts are finally dispelled. LST 58 in the middle of the line hears engine sounds and can only watch as LS 531 directly ahead of it explodes, as 2 unseen torpedoes strike it in quick succession. 58 goes hard to port to avoid the blazing wreck, joining 499 now out on that side of the convoy. Astern of them, 289 spots a torpedo approaching on its starboard side and also turns to the east. The LST takes evasive maneuvers into its own hands, breaking formation to accelerate to flank speed and setting off on a zigzag course back east towards Portland. But it doesn't get far before at 2:28 it spots a torpedo boat on its port side and opens fire with its 40mm anti-air guns, but is unable to score any hits. A torpedo then appears from out of the darkness directly astern. 289 turned desperately to try and avoid it, but could not get round in time. Torpedo slams into and mangles the ship's stern. The explosion kills most of the crew on the bridge and cripples the landing ship, leaving it to try and limp into a friendly port. Meanwhile, at the front of the convoy, 515 is narrowly missed by a torpedo. By this stage, T4 was beginning to lose its order, with the ships charting their own course. 496 was now off to starboard, while 511 had turned east like 289, making its best speed back towards Portland. The crew of 515 do not expect to see a friendly ship out on that side of the convoy, so open fire on it, raking the bridge of 511 with machine gun fire. 18 sailors are wounded before their mistake is realised. At 2:32, Commander Scahill transmitted a report of the action before turning his ship to try and pick up survivors from the stricken landing ships. He was joined in this belatedly by Azalea, which from its position ahead of the convoy had been unable to engage with the torpedo boats attacking from the sides, which is where Scimitar would have been had it still been with the convoy. They were eventually joined by HMS Saladin, which arrived on the scene about 4 AM, followed by HMS Onslow from the east about an hour after that. The dawn light revealed the scale of the damage the German E-boats had inflicted. LST-289 was able to limp eventually into Dartmouth in Devon, where there were better medical facilities for its large number of wounded. In total, some 749 personnel died in the disaster, which made Exercise Tiger several times more deadly than the real landing on Utah Beach weeks later, which saw 197 casualties. Exercise Tiger was a serious loss of life, on a scale that if it had happened on D-Day itself or in another combat zone, it likely would have gotten a lot more attention than it did. But with D-Day so close, there wasn't the time or desire to conduct full and detailed investigations into it, at a time when Allied staffs were already stretched to breaking point under an enormous workload, and close collaboration between the British and Americans was essential ahead of the start of one of the largest and most complex operations in history.
Remember to sign up for MyHeritage using the link in the description for a 14-day free trial and 50% off if you decide to continue your subscription.